up, we have a panel covering one of the latest buzz in technology that is set to change our future. More than ICOs, how are Asian companies putting blockchain to good use? Now let us welcome Ms. Michelle Yeoh, co-founder of DATAVLT, Mr. Ng Yi-Ming, partner of Tribe Ventures. Now this panel is moderated by Technode's reporter, Marsha Borag. Please welcome.
Hello. Please allow me to introduce myself. My name is Marsha Borag. I am Technode's senior reporter. And today I'm joined by Ms. Michelle Yeoh and Mr. Ng Yi-Ming. So, it's been a very interesting year for blockchain and for cryptocurrencies in general. During the past year, Bitcoin has reached $20,000, and now it's only around 6,500, something like this. So, Bitcoin's and other cryptocurrencies problems began in China when the government decided that it would not tolerate ICOs anymore, initial coin offerings, and soon it began to ban trading too. So we are entering now in a very bearish market. Recently, Goldman Sachs has canceled its plans to set up a crypto trading desk, which has also brought Bitcoin prices down. But we're not here to talk about crypto or Bitcoin. We're here to talk about the underlying technology behind it, which is blockchain. And of course, there is a lot of hype around blockchain, as with crypto, but there is also a lot of potential. So I will ask my speakers to introduce themselves.
So hi everyone. My name is Michelle. I'm from one of the co-founders of DATAVLT. Essentially, we're in the space of data analytics integrated with the blockchain technology, and we're based in Singapore. That's essentially what we do.
Hi all, I'm Ming. I'm from Tribe Ventures. We are a Southeast Asian focused venture capital based in Singapore. Over the last 7 years, we've been supporting hundreds of startups across the region. I lead partnerships and investments across Southeast Asia.
Okay, so we have a really good panel now. We have a perspective from a blockchain startup and from blockchain investors. So a very simple question to begin with. Do you think that the initial coin mania kind of overshadowed the whole point about what is blockchain going to bring to companies? Of course, not just the ICO mania, but all the speculation too. So did it kind of overshadow the whole blockchain trend?
Yeah, I think it is. It did, actually. If you're talking about, because the tokens or your currencies are actually, it's a byproduct of blockchain itself. And when, of course, like the gold rush, everybody looks at the gold. They don't look how deep the mountain is and how much the pit has, to offer, and exactly what that means. I would say that we're at the infancy of what blockchain is, and while it's all nice and glittery at the moment, where we have foreseen or we're looking into is the fact that all this hype will eventually sort of like die down a little bit. And then that's where the technology will bring forth companies that have focused on the technology to the next stage. So it's not so much, yeah, you will have the cryptocurrency sort of like, fading away. But then the ones who will survive are the ones who have invested their time and effort on the tech and not so much of the currency itself.
I think I beg to differ on the point that Michelle mentioned. I think over the last 1 year, since the boom and now the downturn in the market, quite a lot of ICOs have slowly faded away. And it's getting harder and harder to raise an ICO today as compared to 1 year ago, where as long as you just mentioned the word ICO, people will put money into you last year. I think it's a good sign of the market, and to see like the crowd coming here, that means people are still interested in what blockchain has to offer. So I don't think that blockchain has been overshadowed because of the entire ICO hype.
Okay, so we are just at the beginning of our journey of understanding what is blockchain and what it can bring. I mean, me personally, I also have a hard time understanding it from the technical point of view, and I guess many other do. But so, what are the most interesting applications you have seen so far? Which companies are developing that applications? I mean, as a beginning, maybe you can introduce what your company also does.
Yeah, sure. So essentially what we're doing is we're taking the data analytics process, and we've integrated blockchain into as part of the process to do a couple of things. One is to make sure that pertinent information is then tracked and kept. And two is to make it affordable. Now, this piece of technology can shorten a lot of processes that delivers a whole lot of efficiencies and values versus then the traditional methodology. I'm not saying the traditional methodology is bad. I'm just saying this is an alternative, right? And in that sense, with what blockchain can do is a whole lot more. And this opens access of this piece of, say, capability that you want for the market, especially for mid-tier economies, for them to be able to use and move ahead in the digital economy, and so we call it, to survive. That is really important. This is a piece of capability that is highly not available to a lot of these companies. And we're not talking about native analytics. We're talking about deeper analytics capabilities that are important to them to move on.
Okay,
Yeah.
so what about other applications that you saw? There's a lot of talk about supply chains, about finance. What are some of the most interesting we should be watching out for?
So right now, I think there's a couple of things that we've seen other companies start looking into. One is through the process and supply chain, like you said. A lot of it has got to do with tracking and moving manufacturing and production into the next level. One of which we have sort of like spoken to would be the aviation industry, and also the chemical engineering for medical industry. You're talking about, the accuracies of production right down to, the propensity for your machinery to fail. Now, if you were to know that, you would then be able to forecast or project when perhaps your machine will start to fail, and when maybe, your formulas are not the efficacy of your formulas are not as great anymore. Those are the things that you can actually use blockchain for. Now, having said that, it's all exciting. I think one of the key big challenges that all these industries face is actually with the overhaul of the whole process. It doesn't just, it's not like I can just put in blockchain and that's it. It's a whole lot of IoTs, making sure that your process chain gets inducted into, how we're going to capture data, how you're going to manage that, how you're going to look at these data, so on and so forth. So I would say that the first few companies that we've been looking, or the first few industries that have been taking on, financial is one, though I think they're facing quite a fair bit of issues, manufacturing, chemical engineering, and as well as hospitality. Yeah.
What about from the investor point of view? Which industries do you think are like most promising, and what kind of applications are we seeing?
I think supply chain, finance, as well as authentication, like what you both have mentioned. It's something very interesting that we are also actively looking at. Maybe this startup, not so sure if you guys have heard of it, VChain. They are currently doing an authentication process for liquor. So they partnered with Shanghai Wine, and they are planning to authenticate the traceability of wine, the source of wine. So today, if I buy a bottle off the shelf in the supermarket, it says it comes from a part of Australia. How do I actually know that that bottle is actually from Australia and not from somewhere else? So they are trying to use the blockchain technology to authenticate that over the next couple of years, as well as fashion products like maybe an Hermes bag or a Louis Vuitton bag. Like, can we have more technologies as compared to just using the naked eye to authenticate whether bags are real? We heard stories in the news that, Chinese are buying branded bags from stores, and even in the stores, they are getting fake bags. So are there methods of technologies such as like blockchain or be it other forms of IoT devices that can help us in this process?
Yeah, that's interesting. VChain is actually an interesting company too, coming from China, and I think they just recently made a deal with a big auto company for developing kind of a reward system for their entertainment platform in the cars. But I forgot which cars, I'm afraid. It's BYD or something like that. Anyway, but like from an investor's point of view, is there a particular application that you consider like very attractive, and how do you even judge that? Because I heard so many projects so far, and a lot of them sound interesting, but it's kind of hard to actually analyze if it has potential or not. So how do you do it?
I think for us, it's a lot about looking at the use case of the blockchain, because you don't have to put everything on the blockchain. And that's what's been happening over the last 1 year. Everyone is trying to fill up the magical word blockchain with everything. But from our point of view, it's really a lot about where does this technology hold, like within the next 5 years, or even greater than 5 years. It's not about whether the token price today that we put in, it's $1, and the next day it will be $2. So that's not something that we look at as traditional venture capitalists. We look at really the long-term aspect of it. So any specific industry, the question that you asked, I would say no. But I would say supply chain, finance, and maybe authentication are somewhere huge and are markets that we see more applications on, and also even real estate. I think that's something coming out a lot recently.
Okay, now maybe a bit tougher question. So many believe that blockchain applications are actually far from being adopted widespread in a way. In a way, like blockchain is an underlying technology, and it might take a while until it reaches the point of monetization. So if this is the case, how can all these blockchain startups find profit until that happens?
If you split, right, the tech, and you just talk about it till the cows come home, it'll still be that. You know, people will just look at the tech and go, oh, I don't exactly know how you're going to integrate this. But the fact of the matter is, if you can explain what it does, and, okay, let me just rephrase that, right? You're not here to make the whole world change with you. You're here to make sure that you can integrate so that you can change some of the things that are being done, improve it, and make it better. So the approach and the methodology is not so much about, hey, you know, this is like, I don't know, the new spaceship that I'm building. It's not. It's really, how do I make your life better? You know, how are you going to integrate into the current processes that we have? The key sort of like, the key factor that we always hit is utilization, right? With any project, with any tech, with anything, utilization is really important. Now, if you tell people that this nut and bolt is the most important thing in this whole entire process, they'll only look at the nut and bolt. They won't look at the whole process, which is what you want them to see. So the question here is, how are you going to applicate or utilize that piece of technology into what is already existing out in the ecosystems that we have, you know, in today? Because the banks, the institutions, the big companies, any other companies, they're not going to change the way that they work just because, right? But if you tell them, look, you don't have to change anything, but we can improve the processes that you have, now that's a different take that we're taking. All right. So it's sort of like an oxymoronic kind of a conversation that we're having. But yeah, that's my sort of perception on this piece of technology. If we choose to emphasize it in a very special unicorn way, then yeah, you're going to have issues. But if we don't find the utilization case.
So basically case by case, and then you find somewhere to apply it. What is your opinion about that?
I think I agree with what Michelle mentioned. It's always about the application. It's not just setting up a blockchain company and decide, oh, I want to make I want to turn this into a profitable business. Because I think as of now, most ICO companies are not profitable, or most blockchain companies haven't even, perhaps, they haven't even received $1 in revenue. So it's a lot about how the technology itself can speed things up in terms of like maybe using distributed ledger technology to make payments, make transactions more efficient. So it's about efficiency, and because of efficiency, you save the work hours that people require to go through a certain manual process. And that's your cost savings more than the profit side, which is about how do we make money from this technology directly. So that's my take on it.
Yeah, and that sounds a lot less, how would I say, sexier than what we previously, what previously people talked about blockchain. It's like revolutionizing, it's this, it's that, but yeah. But the fact of the matter is that current startups in blockchain, like developing applications, are yet to disrupt any kind of process, any kind of industry. And already we are seeing pretty big companies exploring their own applications. For me, as I follow China, I know a lot of that both Tencent and Alibaba has started implementing blockchain in like different areas. Alibaba, for example, has a supply chain application, and also in the real estate. Tencent has been experimenting with invoices, like for taxes, based on blockchain, and there's a lot of interesting stuff going on. So, can like smaller companies compete with big companies that have such big resources to invest in some experimental technology like blockchain? Or do you see them as like threats to startups?
I think they're two different things, right? Now, your Alibabas and your Googles and your whoever's going to take on blockchain, they're not going to share the tech with you. They're going to use it to their own advantages, right? Whereas that's just them. They play with themselves, and they're like, okay, I'll do this for my own good because it's for the good of the company. They're not going to share with the rest of the other industry. That means that if we don't do anything about it, we're going to be left out in the cold. So I still see a very important role with all the other smaller companies who are trying to innovate, trying to provide capability and access to all these other, potentially great stuff that we're doing at the moment. So while you can look at them as a competitor, but as long as they're not looking at you as a market, that's the real truth, right? Big companies will look at you if you have a lot of money to throw at them. But if you don't have a lot of money to throw at them, they're not even going to bat an eye at you, right? So, yeah.
I think be it the blockchain space or the ICO space and the startup space, I think corporates have a huge role to play when working with startups. That's why there are quite a bit of corporate accelerators coming up over the last 2 years. Big companies like Mercedes, big companies like Tencent, they are all running like corporate incubation because they know that startups have the capabilities to be more nimble, to move faster, to test or prove a concept that they set out to deliver. And thereafter, they will decide whether they want to carry on this relationship with the startup. So I think it's the same for the blockchain space. Big companies that might not have that form of like talent or that resources to start building a blockchain infrastructure, they might have capital, but maybe not the right talents. So maybe they can form a collaboration or do more proof of concept on a smaller scale to test whether these applications are usable. And take, for example, if a big company has a huge user base, that's important in the blockchain space because when we talk about decentralizing, it's about the masses. So can we leverage on that as compared to the small startup trying to acquire customers by themselves after raising the money?
Yeah, that's an interesting point. I'm also interested in not just like big companies in China, at least. I'm going to talk about China all the time. I'm sorry. There has been very interesting applications coming from the government. So basically, those are kind of either state-owned companies or companies that has special deals with government. So there are examples of trying to put the social security system on blockchain. There are examples of trying to regulate intellectual property on blockchain. And even other countries have begun like really interesting experiments, especially Estonia, which is trying to figure out what to do with digital IDs. So do you see something happening here, especially in Singapore, but of course across Asia? Like more government involvement, I mean more push from the government to create interesting applications?
I think for me, it would definitely be the MAS project, Project Ubin, that they recently also announced that they partnered with Deloitte, NASDAQ, as well as Antren, to look into how they can use distributed ledger technology for tokenized settlement of tokenized assets, or even whatever payments that you are doing between banks. So I think that's something interesting that the government is driving forward. So yeah, we'll be excited to look at how this entire project develops.
I think in reference to some maybe science fiction movies that have been happening previously, one of my favorite sort of like examples is actually Minority Report. More than not, I think we're moving into a state where maybe traditional institutions and infrastructures may not be able to facilitate the kind of ambitions that we want for country-wise or global-wise, right? You talk about people movements, you're talking about, you know, money movements. Whichever the case is, the question is how do we do that, right? Without one common system or a common base to be able to track. So that is a big question mark. I mean, if we look at Minority Report, that was done in what, 2002? Right? And some of the stuff that they predicted, or let's just talk about how Tom Cruise has taken somebody else's identity and went to a shop. And we just talk about consumers today with hyper-personalization. The way that you're consuming, the way that you're using your mobile phone, the amount of information that you're transacting on your mobile phone, how much of this is already a part and parcel of everybody's life. And these consumers are not going to back down and say, I want a lesser experience. If not, it's going to be even more. You know, IoTs are expected to deliver even more data. Now then the question here is, how are you going to mitigate and manage all those information to deliver the kind of experience that you want, right? So he went into a Gap store and he said, oh, Mr. Sakamoto, did you like the blah, blah, blah that you bought the last time round? We would love to have that kind of experience. Gap would love for you to give them information that Mr. Tan has walked in and bought a couple of shirts the last time round. But how are you going to do that? So if you ask me, we're probably moving in that direction, right? Blockchain is at its infancy, but it is a probable piece of technology that can propel us to that direction. So I think, you know, whether it's government, you know, or private, retail, whichever it is, whatever industry it is, it stands to gain a whole lot more in terms of where we're going, where we're heading, and what we want to be able to do.
Right, and well, speaking about governments, there has been a lot of new interest into regulating. I'm not sure how familiar are we with what's been happening in China, but can you tell us about like Singapore specifically? Has there been any push to regulate?
I think on the common consensus on the ground, I think they are trying to do, based on what we hear on the ground, I think government agencies are trying to understand more about this technology. They have been doing a lot of outreach and awareness, which is good, because sometimes technology just comes in too fast. And I think it's a matter of time before we start looking at more new regulations, probably maybe end of the year or early next year. So that will definitely help to shape the entire ecosystem, be it from like the utility token point of view or the security token point of view. But that's just my opinion.
Okay, so, but many are already predicting, not just because of the regulation, that in the future ICOs are going to continue to be a more difficult thing to organize. I mean, less people are going to participate. The prices are not going to fluctuate so wildly. So the kind of the high area for cryptocurrencies seem to be over. So what are the other options blockchain companies can use to finance themselves? Because for a lot of companies, of course, this was the main kind of path to financing.
I think previously it was a lot about writing a white paper, doing an ICO, then talking about building a product. But can we look at it from a reverse point of view where it's back to the traditional model, where you build your product first, demonstrate to the investors that, hey, this is how the future holds for my blockchain project before you start selling your cryptocurrencies. And there will be immediate utility. So I think companies can start considering really focusing on product, because that's really what going to sell to your investors and make them think, hey, maybe this company is something worth investing in.
So do you, please.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that to watch out for really is the business model behind what you're producing. How is this going to be applicated? How is this going to be useful? Who are going to adopt? Have you spoken to other people? The potential of it. I mean, rightly with what he has said just now, you know, going back to a traditional methodology is not necessarily a bad thing. It just means that companies have to put in more effort to make sure that they have, you know, really something before the money gets pumped in.
Yeah, we have indeed seen a lot of fluff around the blockchain companies and blockchain projects. So, can you share if you ran into some companies that are actually a bit? You don't have to name them, but I'm just interested. What is your opinion on this? Have companies tried to push this trend a bit too far?
Yeah. I think, I think we've seen a lot, right? There's a running joke between DATAVLT and our partners out there, is we should just do a potato chain, track the potatoes where they go. But we've seen quite a fair bit, from tea leaves to pets to
yeah, there's been a lot of crypto pets.
Yeah, and this is where we go, okay, you know, great idea, and there's matchmaking ones that we've seen before and all that. So we go, well, I think the big question is always if that is the best use case for the piece of technology. And that comes to farming as well. We've seen a couple. Yeah. Yeah,
I actually, I know one of my colleagues did a report on chickens on the blockchain. And it was actually quite a big company. I think it was even JD. Yeah. Well, I'm very interested. What is your opinion?
For me, it would be more than just what you guys have mentioned, more than just misuse of like the blockchain technology, but more about how much are founders or companies actually following or adhering to their white paper after they raise their money. I mean, having 20 million, 30 million, or even more within a single fundraise, it's not something that every founder can properly manage. They might not be used to managing this sort of money. A lot of them are seed stage company, which traditionally they probably only going to raise $1 million for the kind of project that they set out to do. So when they receive this large amount of money, and we have seen some started looking to do venture capital investments as a blockchain company, started wanting to build a cryptocurrency exchange, when their business model is actually about building something else. So how much are founders actually keeping to their promises of what they set out to do? So if we take out the white papers from maybe late last year and we take it out today and compare what they have built, how much is actually true? I think that's the next question that we should ask.
Okay, we just have a bit more time for maybe a final question. For you, maybe as an investor, do you think that that institutional investors are going to be more important in the future for blockchain companies than they are now, maybe even more important than ICOs?
I think it will be important, definitely, in any form of assets or in any form of commodities. Like institutional investors are always playing a huge role. So definitely you need the capital to come in. In January, I think the market cap of the cryptocurrency was about $850 billion. And that immediately made people aware, the entire sphere in a global financial market, aware of, hey, what's this like Bitcoin blockchain technology that people are talking about? So I think a lot of times they can bring in added value. They can bring in more technical analysis in terms of this entire ecosystem, as well as the other area that they are looking at actively will definitely be security tokens, which definitely I think there will be more interest for them in that space.
Okay, thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you enjoyed our panel, and we're going to the next one.
Okay, thank you very much, Masha, Michelle, and Yiming. Thanks again. I like the reference to Minority Report there, and we're definitely looking forward to having more new insights about blockchain and how it's going to affect us. Yeah. So.